I'd be very interested by Thierry's view on this as well, but do you see the internet and telecoms as a leapfrogging, as well, a leapfrogging technology that could bring in many more countries, or speed up development in a big way?
Yes. In fact, to give you an example, when I was in Burkina last week, it was on the President's Investment Council. And one of the private sector's request was more transparency, and justice was an issue. And I think one idea that I gave is, why don't you publish on the internet all decisions made by the judge, so that then everybody could, worldwide and in the country, access decision made by judge. And you would see whether or not these are going in terms of responding to the law, obeying the law, and you can people could attack them. And I said, by the time all judge would know that all their decisions would be made public, it might change their perspective. I think internet is what is going to give into Africa, for example, access to educations and access to informations. And if you look at what happened in North Africa even recently, Egypt being part of this, the information and access to information was a critical element. So I think I would even link this to increase transparency and improve democracy within the continent, which I think it's a good thing for us.
In our case, what we see is the increase of, in fact, almost leapfrogging by the continent of mobile application adoption. And I think this is where smartphones are going to play a very important role in, for instance, driving internet access in a number of African countries, mainly because terrestrial infrastructure or in fixed line broadband connections are still problematic, whereas you see a significant increase and growth in mobile connectivity. And as the mobile companies, for instance, are continuing to build applications or broadband access like 3G and so on, we're certainly going to see a significant increase. If you just take banking as an example, today there are about 450 million cell phone subscribers in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa. That's out of a population in Africa of just over 1 billion people. And compare that to a total number of bank accounts, which are less than 100 million bank accounts, would suggest that there's a huge opportunity that exists to bank the unbanked, or at least to provide financial inclusion to a lot of people who were otherwise outside the banking system. Just to give you an example, South Africa presents interesting features in that we have a third world economy alongside a very sophisticated first world economy. Just over the last 2 years that we started rolling out banking services using mobile technology. In a period of 2 years, just our bank, we've grown from nothing, nowhere, to having just over 2.5 million active subscribers that use cell phone banking in this country. We've started rolling out those services in all our subsidiaries in different countries, including Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, and so on. And the rate of growth of mobile banking adoption in those countries is actually now starting to move at a faster pace than it is in South Africa. So it actually indicates the opportunity that exists in these countries. And that's why I think even with internet access and some of the applications that people would typically hear access through their desktops or their laptops or iPads, increasingly with the advent of cheaper smartphones, mobile smartphones, a lot of people in the continent are going to be using those to access applications that are rich in content. And you then start to see the development of local content, which in fact we've started to see in this country, because just some of the applications that we are now starting to see, for instance, with the e-wallet, where you can remit money to someone who doesn't have a bank account in a remote location. And for instance, we have something like, I think, 4 million Zimbabweans that live in this country. And typically they use taxis and buses, which charge them about 20% to remit money across the border to any part of Zimbabwe. So if you're sending 1,000 rand, you're going to pay about 200 rand to a taxi guard to take your money across. With the applications that we now have using mobile technology, you pay a fraction of that. I mean, a fee for transmitting or remitting money across the border will be literally a fraction of the amount that would typically be paid to a taxi guard, which means more money can be spent in these economies, which is why then regional integration becomes important. And it's quite pleasing, I mean, you may have picked up in the media last week, that there's now discussion in the SACU community of having a settlement and payment system that is going to be integrated, which means we can then, with a more regional integrated approach, have a more integrated economic environment where South Africa would certainly benefit, being the more sophisticated of a lot of the economies around us.
Luke, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting once again that the phrase pace was used, and it's that rate of change that I think we're particularly concerned about. Particularly if you look at the two main factors that will drive mobile adoption, one of which is the price of the device, which in Kenya right now you can buy smartphones for $100, which is cheaper than anything available in South Africa currently. The other thing is the price of access, the price of data. And if the data you're buying is a tenth of the price that it is in South Africa, for sure the rate of adoption is going to increase exponentially. And I think those are two critical concerns that we have that we need to address. And if South Africa is going to compete and have rates of adoption that are similar to those in the rest of Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, we need to address those two critical components of price of device and price of access.
How much out of the people using Google, how many of those are using that on the phones over PCs at the moment? Or would you expect, I suppose?
It varies tremendously. What I can say is that on a weekend, there are a lot more people using devices on their mobile phones as a result of the fact that so many people access the internet through work in South Africa. Absolutely. So, let that not change in the internet access policies, please. However, what's really interesting is, rather than the absolute numbers, is the rate of growth of adoption. If we think about the fact that South Africa had 15% more internet users in South Africa, on the other hand, queries, in other words, the searches that people input into Google in South Africa on mobiles increased by over 450% year on year. So that gives you an indication of the relative rate of change and the way that people are adopting these sorts of devices to access the internet. And despite that, what we're hearing is that this is happening faster in Kenya. And it's really interesting to me that despite the fact that we have a very sophisticated infrastructure in comparison, we're not yet able to bring those sorts of devices to our population at that price.
It's also Kenya who pushed the mobile banking first as well, was that right? Or this was something which Kenya pioneered, I think, before South Africa, or was that?
No, it was here. The only thing is, again, the regulatory environment in Kenya was such that non-banks could get into the space of mobile banking transactions. And that's why we've seen a significant growth in M-Pesa, applications in Kenya, which is quite different in this environment, because the banking and cell phone regulatory environment is such that you'd probably still need to have, you still do need to have a banking license to be able to take deposits and allow people to transact in a similar fashion as what M-Pesa is doing in Kenya.
We should go to the audience. I was going to ask one last question to Thierry and Linda, I think, which is, we've had some talk, and Sizwe referred to it obliquely, this idea of having, not just in terms of banking, but in terms of free trade, having a Southern African free trade zone. A, how realistic do you think that is? And B, what kind of differences would it make to the issues which concern you?
So before I respond to this, I just one point to add to what I've just said on the mobile in Kenya. One of the reasons might also be that the infrastructure, the fixed line infrastructure in Kenya is not as good as in South Africa. So I can tell you, because I pay the bill of my director there who has to have internet access, and it costs, I think, almost close to $1,000 a month to have an ADSL line because it goes through satellites. So the mobile phone is probably the cheapest way to access internet today in Kenya, and that might be a reason. But coming back, I think, to your point, I think it's quite important because the development and the growth on this continent is going to be based on our ability, I think, to have regional integration, as you mentioned. I have in one of my presentations a chart which shows transactions made within Western Europe in terms of trade, and within Western Europe it's about above 80%. In Sub-Saharan Africa today it's about 10%. And the potential for growth is right there. And if you ask to the audience, generally speaking, why is the level of trade so low in Sub-Saharan Africa? So people talk about, in infrastructure, this and that. The main reason is we don't have anything to trade. Most of the times in Sub-Saharan Africa, we do export commodities and we import finished product. So I come from Côte d'Ivoire. We are the first, and I think the best cocoa producer in the world. Yet, if I ask you where do you buy the best chocolate, you're going to tell me either Switzerland or Belgium. Okay? And until the day we're going to say Ghana or Côte d'Ivoire are the place where you buy the best chocolate, we would have an issue. So I think getting trade zones, ensuring that there's a better growth in the trade within our region is the best competitive factor we can have to grow our different economy, but to make our private sector companies more competitive.
Well, I think there are two pieces to that, and competitive is a key one, and Luke mentioned it as well. We do export finished goods, and it's a very important part of our business, and anything that helps improve our competitiveness, whether it's importing products to use or exporting finished goods, competitiveness is what it's all about. And where we could possibly not realize our expectations here are if some of the trends continue with cost of labor, cost of power, difficulties in exporting products. All of those items would affect our ability to continue to be cost effective out of this region. And it truly is all about competitiveness. And certainly the trends we see at the moment in South Africa do not, or they do cause us concern about continuing to be competitive in the worldwide market. So I think anything we could do to improve competitiveness helps us improve our business posture, which helps us hire more local people, and that's all good for South Africa.